This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Lo Kui Su. Our top stories: hundreds of thousands evacuated across eastern China a day after Typhoon Gemi makes landfall in Fujian province. And ASEAN foreign ministers in Laos for their latest meeting, talking security with partners beyond the region, including China, Japan and South Korea. The US looking to ally Canberra to help project power in the South China Sea, building infrastructure in Australia's Northern Territory. Vandalism on several high-speed rail routes in France mars the build-up to the opening of the Olympic Games in Paris. North Korea's economy roars back to life as burgeoning trade with Russia helps it log the fastest growth since 2016. And also on this bulletin, we examine why more young people in China are choosing to settle in rural areas, reversing the trend of moving to major cities. Nearly 300,000 people have been evacuated in eastern China as Typhoon Gemi makes landfall in Fujian province overnight. Gemi is the most powerful storm to hit the mainland this year. Authorities have issued an orange alert. That's the second highest level for this typhoon. Most flights to and from Fujian have been cancelled and several train services suspended. No casualties, though, have been reported. Typhoon Gemi cut a path across northern Taiwan yesterday, leaving 5 people dead and more than 500 injured. Search efforts continue for 6 Myanmar nationals who went missing after their cargo ship sank off Taiwan at the height of the storm. 3 other crew members have been rescued. Taiwan's Coast Guard also attempting to retrieve dozens of sailors after Gemi grounded their freighters. 8 vessels were left stranded, a number that officials have described as unprecedented for a typhoon. And for more, Deborah Wong joins us live from Hong Kong. Deborah, what do we know about the extent of damage caused by Gemi in mainland China?
So Gemi so far has made landfall in Fujian on Thursday, and so far local media are reporting about 85 hectares of crops have been damaged, and that estimated loss is about 1.6 million USD so far. There have been no reports of casualties or deaths at the moment, so that's fortunate. But the monsoon rains that battered China in the days and weeks leading up to the typhoon has left 1 dead and 3 missing in Gansu province. So it's being compared to Typhoon Doksuri that impacted China last year, which caused nationwide losses of nearly 30 billion USD, and it even triggered historic floods as far up north as Beijing. And Gemi is expected to cause flash floods as well as water logging this time round, and it's also dangerous given that the northern parts and southern parts of China are still recovering from a series of severe storms that hit China earlier this month.
Deborah, as we've already mentioned, evacuations have taken place as well, and railway services as well as some government services have been suspended in the eastern part of China. What else have authorities done to minimize damage from this typhoon?
So aside from the evacuations, about 5,000 personnel have been deployed to affected areas. And what they're doing is patrolling the seawalls. They're also heading to the emergency shelters where people have been evacuated to hand out necessities. And aside from Fujian, authorities are also bracing for heavy rainfall in nearby provinces such as Jiangxi, Zhejiang, Guangdong, Hunan, and as well as Hubei. Although the rain is expected to weaken as it moves inland, authorities are not taking any chances. They've shut down public transport, offices. I also understand that some passenger train services have been suspended. And in Guangdong, about 70,000 people have been evacuated so far. So, and this is not surprising because that province was hit by flash floods, heavy rains earlier this month, even leading to the collapse of a highway that killed about 48 people. And back then, Chinese President Xi Jinping called for all-out research efforts, to deal with that problem. And just on Thursday, he also chaired a meeting to tackle work on flood control and disaster relief. And what he's doing is calling for more work to look at reinforcing water infrastructure to prevent any bursting of dams as well as breaches in major rivers and reservoirs. He's also calling for the prompt allocation of relief funds and quick access to medical services, as well as better protection for the agricultural sector, because, China is putting a lot of emphasis on food security. Back to you.
And thanks to Deborah Wong reporting live to us there from Hong Kong. Authorities in the Philippines are racing against time to contain a massive oil spill that could become the country's worst in its history. A tanker was carrying 1.4 million litres of industrial fuel when it sank yesterday in Manila Bay. One crew member has died. The Coast Guard will be deploying additional floating barriers to contain the spill. Officials say the slick could spread to waters off Manila. A probe is underway to determine the cause of this incident and whether the sinking is related to Typhoon Gemi. The MT Terra Nova was heading for the central city of Iloilo when it hit heavy rain. Thousands of people in northern Japan have been forced to evacuate due to record rainfall. At least one person has been killed and 4 are missing. Yamagata and Akita prefectures were hardest hit, prompting emergency warnings of heavy rain. According to the Met Agency, parts of Yamagata have not seen this much rain since records started in 1976. While most of the rain had eased by the afternoon, rail services are still partially suspended. Authorities are on the lookout for possible flooding and landslides. Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has urged people to put safety first. So far, more than 200,000 people have been advised to leave their homes. Amongst them, 4,000 have been moved to shelters. Japan's weather agency forecasts up to 20 centimeters worth of rain throughout the evening. The high-speed train network in France has been paralyzed by malicious attacks just hours before the opening ceremony of the 2024 Paris Olympics. A train operator, SNCF, is reporting multiple cases of vandalism, including arson that damaged installations on the lines. And that's left heavy disruptions to services on its Atlantic, Northern and Eastern lines. Traffic on the high-speed line between Lille and Paris has been cut off since 5:15 a.m. local time. Several train services have had to be diverted to different tracks, but SNCF says most routes have been cancelled. Attacks also having a domino effect, causing widespread delays impacting about 800,000 travellers. Officials warn disruptions could persist through the weekend while repairs are being carried out. France has 4 main high-speed railway lines that connect Paris to the rest of France. 3 of these lines have been hit. Passengers have been told to postpone their trips and to avoid train stations. The French sports minister has condemned the attacks and assured the public that the weekend will go on.
We're still in the process of analyzing all the impacts, assessing what we're going to implement as solutions, because it's going to have impacts also over the weekend. And we want this not to jeopardize the quality of the experience for the athletes and for the spectators. So it's a huge work in terms of crisis management, but we were prepared for that. We had prepared for all scenarios. SNCF, the operator for the high-speed lines, the Ministry of Transport, together with the region, who is in charge of a number of transport lines as well and stations. We are all together as a team, united to find the right solutions and be very, very fast back on our feet.
The U.S. military is reportedly building facilities worth hundreds of millions of dollars in northern Australia. That's amid a continued rise in tensions with China. Reuters news agency revealing that Darwin is the top overseas location for construction spending for the U.S. Air Force and Navy, with more than $300 million already set aside for this year and the next. The U.S. Navy in June sought out contractors for projects worth up to $2 billion to build storage for fuel, wharves, runways and hangars in places that include Australia's Cocos Islands and neighbouring Papua New Guinea and Timor-Leste. Officials cited in the Reuters report say Darwin, which is situated closer to the Philippines than Australia's capital, Canberra, is increasingly seen as strategically vital for US defence planning. The city in the Northern Territory has long been a garrison town for the Australian Defence Force. It hosts a rotating US Marine Force that stays for 6 months every year. An agreement reached in 2011 allows them to train in Darwin on a temporary basis. The US Marine Rotational Force commander says their role has now evolved into providing regional deterrence.
We're more focused on, again, that interoperability with the Australian Defence Forces. How can we project power from Northern Australia into the region, working with the Philippine Defence Forces, again, Papua New Guinea, Timor-Leste, Indonesia, etc.
The US has charged a North Korean man that it's accusing of working as a military intelligence operative for Pyongyang. Rim Jong-hyuk was indicted by a Kansas grand jury after being accused of hacking into healthcare providers and other entities, stealing sensitive information and installing ransomware to fund further attacks. Officials claim the hacks on American hospitals and medical facilities disrupted the treatment of patients. In one instance, Rim and other members of the state-sponsored Andariel group encrypted the files and servers of a hospital in Kansas, forcing it to pay to get its data back.
The perpetrators left behind a ransom note demanding payment in Bitcoin in exchange for restoring access to the servers. It reads in part, and it is shown on the screen to my left. If you want to restore your files, you will need to make the payment. Otherwise, all your files will be posted in the internet, which may lead to loss of reputation and cause troubles for your business.
A US space agency, NASA, and several military bases were also said to have been hit, with perpetrators believed to have had access to their computers for more than 3 months. A senior FBI agent said they went after details of fighter aircraft, missile defense systems, satellite communications, as well as radar systems. Over the years, the U.S. Justice Department has prosecuted multiple cases related to North Korean hacking, often citing a profit-driven motive. Still ahead on East Asia tonight, the U.S. military reportedly planning new facilities in northern Australia, as we just reported, as it competes with China for influence in the Indo-Pacific. NVIDIA supplier SK Hynix will invest nearly $7 billion to build a chip plant in South Korea, a day after reporting strong quarterly results. Well, it's time for business news with Roland Lim. Roland, North Korea's economy is staging a strong rebound last year.
You heard right, Wei, so it's roared back to life after ending, a 3-year streak of contraction. Now, this as arms transfers with Russia and a recovery in trade with China fueled the growth. A report by South Korea's central bank, viewed as providing the best analysis into the secretive regime, shows its gross domestic product grew at its fastest pace since 2016. The Bank of Korea report shows that GDP in North Korea expanded 3.1% in 2023 year on year. It says that heavy industries and chemical industries led the growth, soaring 8.1% on year. While the report didn't say those factors or sectors engaged in arms production, it noted higher output in the primary metals can include iron and steel. The expansion in North Korea's economy follows closer ties between Pyongyang and Moscow, which is supporting Kim Jong-un's regime. The end of COVID-19 border curbs also boosted trade with China. Now, Russia and North Korea have denied accusations of arms trade. And while the Bank of Korea report doesn't include the exact value of the transfers, South Korea has said that the materials Pyongyang received for its economy and food from Moscow have helped Kim stabilize prices. And this is likely to have boosted manufacturing. SK Hynix has decided to invest about $6.8 billion to build a new semiconductor plant in an emerging chip hub in South Korea. The world's second biggest memory chip maker, which is also a key supplier to NVIDIA, says the factory will be in the Yongin semiconductor cluster. Now, located south of the country's capital, Seoul, that's where the South Korean government is looking to build a big complex. This will be SK Hynix's first manufacturing plant in the cluster. It's slated to start construction next March and to be completed by May of 2027. After the first fabrication plant, SK Hynix will build 3 more that will produce next-generation chips, making the Yongin cluster a global AI semiconductor production hub. SK Hynix has been riding the AI wave through its client NVIDIA. Yesterday, the South Korean firm said it turned profitable for the April to June quarter, swinging from a loss a year earlier. Now, revenue more than doubled. Apple has been elbowed out of the top 5 smartphone sellers in China for the first time in 4 years. The iPhone maker lost ground to models from domestic phone makers, including Huawei, in the second quarter. Now, Apple's total shipments for the quarter ending June stood at 9.7 million units. That's down from 10.4 million the same quarter last year. Now, its market share fell to 14% from 16% in the same quarter last year. The decline led Apple's ranking in the Chinese smartphone market to fall to 6th place from 3rd. Apple is ramping up discounts to entice customers. The US company earlier launched an aggressive campaign in May and offered price cuts of up to $319 on selected iPhone models. Meanwhile, analysts believe Huawei's strong performance will continue throughout the year. A research firm projected that Huawei's overall smartphone shipments in China will exceed 50 million units this year. And this could make it the #1 seller in the country with a 19% market share. Chinese firm saw shipments surge more than 40% on year in the second quarter alone. And that's bolstered by the launch of its new Pura 70 series in April. Toyota is reportedly planning to build a battery plant for electric vehicles on Japan's so-called Silicon Island of Kyushu. The report by Nikkei Asia says that the company is trying to establish Kyushu as part of the central plan for its EV supply chain and as an export base to Asia. Now, the southernmost of Japan's 4 main islands, Kyushu is home to many auto and semiconductor plants, including those from Japanese automakers like Toyota subsidiaries, Daihatsu, and Nissan. Toyota's new battery plant is said to be located in an industrial park that's being built by the local government in the north of Kyushu. That's about 40 kilometers from the auto giant's Miyata plant, which assembles Lexus vehicles. Now, the EV battery plant expected to be the main supplier to the Miyata branch, with an annual production capacity of 430,000 vehicles, 90% of which will be exported. Now, Toyota is aiming to sell around 3.5 million EVs a year worldwide by 2030 and hopes to make its luxury Lexus brand a pillar of its EV strategy. Now, the auto giant had announced plans in May to invest nearly $13 billion in EVs, AI, and supply chain until March of next year. It's time now to have a look at how Asian markets ended the week. They are mostly higher. Now, Chinese stocks closed slightly up, ending 4 sessions of declines. Now, they closed just as a report emerged that China is mulling hiking fees of at least tenfold on high-frequency trades. That's the latest attempt to rein in some quantitative strategies that regulators view as a threat to the stock market. Hong Kong also ending slightly higher. Japan's Nikkei closing in the red for the 8th session, hitting a 3-month low. Investors continuing to adjust their positions amid uncertainty over the direction of the U.S. stock markets. It's a much better session in Seoul for the Kospi, which rose as chip makers rebounded. Earlier, Eli Lee from the Bank of Singapore spoke to CNA about the outlook for China's economy. Now, he thinks that Chinese policymakers have recognized the need to do more to boost growth.
There is a recognition that more needs to be done by the Chinese policymakers to address very, I would say, dire near-term headwinds that the economy is facing. And the 2 cuts, first to the 7-day repo rate and to the 1-year policy loan rate, is much needed in my view. And in addition to monetary policy, I will also add that it's stepping up its fiscal actions as well. We saw just yesterday an announcement of a 300 billion yuan spending to upgrade and trade in existing equipment. And I think more needs to be done to boost demand in the Chinese economy. Now, I think the Chinese economy is struggling with a few issues right now. Internally, I think deflationary pressures are still a concern. Sentiment is still quite weak, and we haven't really seen a decisive turnaround in the property market today. And externally, I think the yield differential, given that the US Federal Reserve has not yet started to cut rates, is keeping the Chinese offshore yuan on the back foot as well. And I think the Chinese policymakers must be quite cautious in stimulating the economy, in implementing monetary loosening policies, that it does not weaken its currency excessively as well.
And you're all caught up with the business news. Back to you, Wei Su.
And thanks for that, Roland. And looking at news outside of East Asia, Vietnam will lay to rest later today the late General Secretary of the Communist Party, that's Nguyen Phu Trong. He died last Friday at the age of 80 from illness. A 2-day state funeral for Mr. Zhao is currently underway. Foreign dignitaries at this event include U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and the chairman of China's People's Political Consultative Conference, that's Wang Huning. Thousands of Vietnamese people spent hours queuing last night outside the National Funeral Home, where the casket has been held.
Tâm nguyện của em là em chỉ muốn là vào trong kia thắp được một nén hương để tiễn biết bác. Ấn tượng nhất của em là bác là một người sống hết lòng vì dân, vì nước, mà bác rất là thân thiện. Cái điều đấy là một điều rất là đáng quý, mà không phải một vị lãnh đạo nào cũng có thể làm được.
Opening hours at the funeral home were extended for the public to pay their respects to Vietnam's late party chief. Mr. Zhao died without completing his third term at helming the most powerful political office in the country. Hanoi is facing greater uncertainty as its leaders seek a new candidate for a power transition. Still ahead on this bulletin, a reversal of trends. We look at why China's youths are increasingly heading away from cities and into the countryside. And a reminder of our top stories: hundreds of thousands evacuated in eastern China as Typhoon Gami slams into Fujian province. Authorities are bracing for heavy downpours and flash floods. France's high-speed train network paralyzed by malicious attacks, affecting hundreds of thousands of passengers nationwide just hours before the opening ceremony of the Paris Olympics. U.S. military reportedly building facilities worth hundreds of millions of dollars in northern Australia amid continued rise in tensions with China. ASEAN foreign ministers in Laos for their latest meeting, talking security with partners beyond the region, including China, Japan, and South Korea. And China's top diplomat Wang Yi says relations with Japan are at a, quote, critical stage of retreat. He's calling on both sides to, quote, work in the same direction to manage their differences. Mr. Wang held talks with his Japanese counterpart on the sidelines of the ASEAN ministerial meeting in Laos today. In a statement, the Chinese foreign minister said he's hoping Japan can work on what he called a correct understanding of China so it can, quote, pursue a rational China policy. Japan is in line with the United States' semiconductor restrictions on China, which has added to strained ties with Beijing. Japanese Foreign Minister Yoko Kamikawa says those restrictions are not directed at any one particular country, but adds that while cooperation with China has great potential, there are unresolved issues. Separately, the Chinese foreign minister also met with South Korea's top diplomat today, in a meeting in which he warned against what he called interference from external factors, calling on both sides to improve their mutual trust. These talks come as ASEAN foreign ministers gather in Laos for a second day, meeting with their East Asian partners behind closed doors to discuss security issues, including dispute in the South China Sea. And for more this, our ASEAN correspondent Leong Wai-kit is on the ground in Vientiane. Wai-kit, tensions, as we just mentioned, in the South China Sea. Now, those are not going away. How have China and ASEAN foreign ministers tackled this item in their talks today?
Well, we don't have any information as to what have come out of the meetings between ASEAN and China, especially with regard to the South China Sea. But what we do know is that the bloc is extremely keen to use political platforms such as this to cool down temperatures on the maritime front. We know that the Philippines wants to insert a paragraph in the final joint communique coming out later this week to mention injuries sustained in the disputed waters. This is, of course, referring to a recent incident when a sailor had lost his thumb during an altercation with the Chinese side on the maritimes, on the South China Sea. We also understand that the Philippines wants to introduce the ASEAN Coast Guard Forum, possibly as a formal forum to discuss issues related to the South China Sea. Experts say that China is most likely to reject this platform. Other observers say that this is actually a very good platform, given that this is the Coast Guard we're talking about, not your navies, with visuals of warships and heavy machinery. Now, this is a particularly important development because creative solutions is very important, given that the negotiations for Code of Conduct on the South China Sea, as we all know, is not going anywhere.
All right. Wai-kit, at this meeting, it's a chance for ASEAN ministers to have, first we mentioned, closed-door meetings with dialogue partners from China, South Korea, Japan, the US and Russia as well. They can do that behind closed doors. They can also have on the sidelines talks as well as trilateral, bilateral talks. It has met with ministers from Japan, China, South Korea. Any news on anything coming out of these meetings, both official and unofficial?
Right. Now, the bloc is very well aware that it's meeting these East Asian partners after trilateral summits that took place in South Korea months ago. And these trilateral talks have been described as positive by some observers. Some have pointed out that China, South Korea, Japan had chosen to tread very carefully on political and security issues, choosing to focus on areas of cooperation, as well as bringing up facts like they should do more regular talks. But this will still be difficult to navigate because there will still be contentious or potentially contentious issues coming out of these meetings between ASEAN and the East Asia partners. Much has been talked about for Japan's increased role on the security front. Some have been calling for Japan to take on a bigger security role and for ASEAN or ASEAN member states to tap on Japan's role and its link to Quad, which it is a member of, to expand ASEAN's security presence. Now, some say that this is good because ASEAN and Japan are trusted partners and Japan has earned itself a reputation of a trusted middle power. But there are also other camps fearing that being involved with the Quad, being associated with the Quad may water down the centrality of ASEAN. Other potential contentious issues may include Japan and South Korea's recent move to say that they want to take part in the Pillar 2 of AUKUS. AUKUS is, of course, the defense pact where US and UK are helping Australia to build nuclear-powered submarines. Now, Australia has come out to say that this is not an expansion of AUKUS, not an expansion of the pact. It is merely working with countries and tapping on their expertise to expand on this AUKUS deal. Of course, all these will not sit very well with China, given that China sees the AUKUS deal as the West's attempt to balance its role and its presence in the region.
Okay, let's return to a story that is more internal to ASEAN. I think we were talking about this, in fact, last night, the developing situation in which a border town has reports suggesting armed groups, ethnic armed groups, taking over that town from Myanmar's military government. And this town has trade links, close links with China. Could ASEAN members, individually or as a bloc, perhaps be looking to China at this meeting to help them resolve ongoing crisis post-coup in Myanmar?
I'll come to that in just a while, Wei Su, but I want to share with you the latest development since we last spoke last night, as you said. Various sources have told me that the ethnic armed group MNDAA, in fact, does not have full control of Lashio, which is the strategic town we were talking about. In fact, there's also reports that there are now civilian deaths because there are clashes between the ethnic armed group and the Myanmar military. Now, China, as long as its interests are at stake, and for Lashio, it is very obvious it has economic interests there, it will step up, it will be more vocal. In fact, it has brokered several truces between those warring factions. It has also called out violence because that violence had spilled over to its side of the border, injuring and killing its civilians. But on the broader picture, apart from the known 5-point consensus with which ASEAN is using to resolve resolution with Myanmar, ASEAN is well aware that Myanmar has 5 friendly neighbors that borders Myanmar's countries. It's also aware that there are other external parties such as China that has more influence over Myanmar. And I'm told that ASEAN will not hesitate to pull strings or tap on these actors to move the needle forward on Myanmar. But the question is what Myanmar will or will not do, which may upset its friendly allies, including its border country members, and as well as China. So we have to wait and see what Myanmar does, especially in the next few days when the state of emergency expires.
Thanks for simplifying a very difficult situation for us. Leong Wai-kit, live from Vientiane in Laos. A decades-old problem for China's rural regions is a shortage of skilled labor. Young people have generally headed for cities with the promise of better jobs and better pay. But in the last few years, we've seen signs of reversal there, with more young people headed away from cities and towards the countryside. Young and Rural in China, as a new 2-part documentary on CNA, looks at why this is happening. Here's an excerpt.
Deep within the eastern Chinese province of Zhejiang, amidst the sprawling farmlands of Anji County, a new and ultra-modern community has sprung up, standing apart from its old agricultural surroundings. It's a beacon for a wave of young Chinese professionals seeking to redefine their approach to work and life. The enclave is known as Dian Yuchun, and it's home to one of the largest communities of digital nomads in the country, hailing from all across China.
其实数字游民的话，是在年轻人的这个群体里面，也算是一个新的物种。对他们只需要拿着电脑，带着笔记本，在有电、有网络的地方，他就可以办公，就可以产生生产力。我们周边的环境是看起来非常现代化的一个地方，它的道路也是非常新的，建筑也非常新。但是这种乡村在中国其实其他很多地方其实还有很多。
The enclave's residents inject new vigor to this once sleepy countryside village, an outcome that was part of a grand design. Since 2017, under its rural revitalization strategy, the Chinese government has been trying to entice educated youth to the countryside to help to stimulate rural economies. Interest only picked up recently.
在疫情之前，其实一线城市对远程工作的一个接受度是非常低的，特别是在疫情之后，这个数据在往上走。这是我们 A 栋2楼的一个主要工作办公空间。这块是一个半开放式可以对话的一个小舞台，平时在这里会有一些交谈对话，也有一些活动在这里发生。
A 2022 survey conducted by China Youth Daily revealed that 70% of respondents believe that the countryside has become more attractive to young individuals. China's youth are at the forefront of a rural renaissance in the country, transforming its vast hinterlands.
For more on this, we have the documentary's producer, Ray Ye. He joins us live this year. Thanks for joining us this evening, Mr. Ye. Now, rural reform in China, in fact, we say it started since 1970, but in fact, even prior to that, there have always been attempts to reform China's rural livelihoods, the economy, the people's lives there. Now, this latest, one of the many plans, do you see it as being sustainable and surviving all the different changes that are likely to be taking place both in China's countryside and in its cities?
I would say after the pandemic, there's a lot more willingness for young people to move to the countryside, because now there are companies who are more open to the idea of them working remotely. And during the pandemic, there's also been a lot of interest for them to see what's in their backyard in the countryside. And I think what I've seen, they quite like how the places have sort of developed into much more modern. And therefore, there's a lot more interest. And now that's the first step, right, to get the rural economies going. So what we are seeing now is a lot of these digital nomad hubs being set up all across the country. Some of them are subsidized by the local governments. So it doesn't take a lot for them to just pack their bags to move there. Given that that's the first step, I think what a lot of these people are hoping that they would do is then to stay put. And you don't need a lot of them to stay put. There's an estimate of the number of people who can potentially be digital nomads, and that's in the tens of millions of people. So you just need a small percentage of them to stay and set up businesses there, and that's how I think there's more hope for rural.
So we talk about revitalization. So it's not, okay, for example, what you say, so digital nomads, people bringing life from the city, but they are bringing with them the city life. Meanwhile, agriculture in China remains a very big part of its economy. Is there sufficient interest in agriculture, not being a city person living in the countryside, but in agriculture, to see real rebirth, regrowth, I suppose creativity and innovation in that sector?
So this time around, when I'm in China, I'm seeing actually this kind of interest being picked up by a lot of young people who have worked in the cities. A lot of them are tech workers who've sort of lost interest in the big internet companies, and they have now brought their mindset to the rural countries, because they were originally from these rural hometowns. And what they are seeing is that in many of these places, the farmers are very, very old. There's no way you can sort of teach them new ways to farm. And therefore, they want to bring technology into farming. And actually, one of them I have interviewed. We can actually take a look at that.
It's just past dawn in the county of Qionglai in Sichuan. Xinqian's workers have been here since 6:30. Some work in the yard. Others are on the farm. One of them is Li Jianfen, Xinqian's mother. She's well connected in the village and knows exactly which of her friends would be available for hire at any given day.
现在每天走田子街看工人干活，我也在给帮到一起干。收割、摘枝，什么都干。反正田子的活路他们做，我也一起帮着做，对不对？带头做，准确的说带头做，不能够看到他们做，他们都是老年人些。
At 50, Jianfen is the youngest member of the crew. The average age of farmers here is 70, a statistic that is likely to worsen. Few of the village's younger residents have stayed on as farmhands. To overcome this, Xinqian wants to automate as many farming processes as he can.
这是我们跟科技公司木琴共创的。
Xinqian is also collaborating with an agritech firm to test its latest invention, a robot tractor that dispenses fertilizers. Xinqian's idyllic farming lifestyle is a stark contrast to his life just 2 years ago. This is footage Xinqian filmed of himself just months before making his major career shift. As a product manager at ByteDance, one of the world's biggest tech companies, Xinqian improved user experiences on apps like Douyin, the Chinese equivalent of TikTok. It was a job and a pay package that any other 28-year-old would envy.
我去离职了。
Not for Xinqian, who felt disillusioned with the tech industry 5 years into his career.
反正做了1年之后，我会觉得，创新逐渐在变得很小，没太多大的东西可以做了哈。
Oh, that young man likely suffering burnout. I mean, that is a very difficult job as well, very demanding. But okay, he moves to the countryside. He helps farmers to develop their tech approach to farming. Should he lose interest, and we do lose interest when we're young, are there other work opportunities for people like Xing Chen or anyone else who decides to go to the countryside and wants to expand their life there?
Yes, so what I've seen is that actually many of these rural villages are now headed by young people themselves. I've met people in their late 20s, early 30s who are now sort of in charge of revitalizing their rural economies. And a lot of them actually have a lot of interest in ecotourism as well as heritage tourism and sports tourism. So with the pandemic having sort of having the Chinese people getting more interested in their own tourism industries, I think that's one area that actually is very good right now for young people to get into in the rural areas. Because
all right, thanks so much for coming and joining us and explaining all that to us this evening, Mr. Ye. For a fuller picture on how China's youth are transforming the rural landscape, catch parts 1 and 2 of Young and Rural in China, because Ray Ye is the producer of that, at 9 p.m. Saturday and Sunday on CNA. And still ahead on East Asia tonight, security issues dominating the Paris Olympics just hours away from the opening ceremony. A Franco-Swiss airport has been evacuated due to a bomb alert. A return to our developing story out of France. Travel disruptions, massive disruptions ahead of the opening ceremony of the Paris Olympics, triggered by an attack on the high-speed rail system. Tony Waterman joins us now. Tony, even on a normal day, an attack like this would be hugely disruptive, let alone as we head into the Paris Olympics. And now we're hearing of a bomb alert issued by Air France.
Yeah, you're right. That bomb alert coming, or a security reason causing the evacuation of an airport in the northeast of the country, right on the border with Switzerland. Officials making that announcement that they have evacuated the terminal, but things now seem to have returned to normal. They are normal operations. Passengers are back in that terminal. But this particular airport has been subject to a number of bomb threats in recent months. So they're taking no risks here. And of course, coming at the same time that we had this overnight attack on France's high-speed rail network, officials calling it an intentional, coordinated arson attack on 3 of the lines, the north, east and west lines, which has essentially paralyzed travel to the different parts of the country. There was an attempt on a 4th line, the southeast line, but that was foiled before it was able to take place. Officials say they are still trying to understand what the motive is, and that they have deployed thousands of rail workers to fix the problem, because as you mentioned, we are at the eve of the opening ceremony for the Olympics, and there are 800,000 passengers they're expecting to be impacted by the train disruption through the weekend. They don't think they're going to be able to get it completely back up and running until Monday. And officials had been encouraging people that live in Paris to actually leave the city during the Olympics. So it's causing major disruptions, and there are concerns that it could impact potentially some Olympic delegations.
Tony, as you mentioned, that bomb alert, that is not unusual. This does happen, and that's because authorities are taking precautions to make sure nothing happens. So on the one hand, making sure nothing happens, and on the other hand, also reassuring the many, many attending in Paris for the Olympics, or throughout France as well, that they will be safe. What are officials doing on that front to make sure people feel safe, on top of making sure they are safe?
Yeah, security has really been the top priority of officials here in Paris because, as you know, for the very first time in Olympic history, the opening ceremony is not going to be held inside an enclosed space inside a stadium, but in fact taking place in public. About 100 boats are going to be carrying 10,000 athletes down the River Seine on the 6-kilometer-long course in the open air. And of course, France has this very tragic and painful history with terrorist attacks. So they have deployed 75,000 police officers, soldiers, and private security guards to make sure that people are safe. They have barricaded off the entire area around this evening's opening ceremony. And the only way you can access it is with a special QR code. So they really are trying to put in place all of these precautions. But no matter what they do, it is never completely safe. There is always the chance that there could be a terror attack. And of course, what we have seen here overnight with these arson attacks on the high-speed rail system, this is really going to be heightening that level of security this evening.
Oh, thanks to Tony Waterman speaking to us there in Paris. Even with these disruptions, the City of Light is expected to ignite soon with Olympic fever. The Paris Games are said to be unlike any we have seen before. Here's a look at what makes the 2024 Olympics so special.
Paris will make history as the third city to host the Summer Olympics 3 times, joining London and Los Angeles in this elite club. But it's not just about repetition, it's about revolution. Now picture this. The Seine Paris icon river transformed into a sprawling Olympic venue. The opening ceremony will break tradition by taking place outdoors along the Seine with athletes parading on boats. It's expected to draw a live audience of more than 300,000 people. New sports are making a splash too. Breakdancing will make its Olympic debut. Yes, you heard that right, breakdancing. It's officially called breaking, and it joins skateboarding, sport climbing and surfing, which were introduced in Tokyo. Speaking of surfing, competitors will catch waves in Tahiti, part of French Polynesia, making it the farthest an Olympic event that has been held from the host city. At almost 16,000 kilometers away from Paris, it's literally on the other side of the world. Now, these games are also aiming to set new records in sustainability. The organizers plan to cut carbon footprint in half compared to previous Olympics. They're using existing or temporary venues for 95% of the events, with only one permanent new venue being built. The Olympic Village is another groundbreaking feature. After the Games, it will be transformed into a new eco-friendly neighborhood, providing homes for around 6,000 people. Now, even the medals are unique this time. For the first time in more than a century, they'll feature pieces of the Eiffel Tower. Now, each medal will include a small hexagonal piece of iron taken from the iconic landmark during renovations. But it's not just about what's new. These games are also about reconnecting with Olympic history. Equestrian events will take place in the gardens of Versailles, while the Champs-Élysées will host cycling competitions, and what a backdrop that would be. Now, here are some numbers to get your head around. 10,500 athletes, 206 nations, 32 sports, 329 events, and a staggering 15 million spectators expected. And let's not forget the Paralympics, which will follow from August 28th to September 8th. And for the first time ever, the Paralympic Games will have the same logo as the Olympics, emphasizing inclusiveness and unity. Well, from its river-based opening ceremony to its Eiffel Tower medals, the Olympic Games Paris 2024 is set to be a spectacular blend of tradition and innovation, promising an unforgettable summer of sport in the heart of France.
CNA's Alif Amshar and Matthew Mohan will be bringing you sports on Team Singapore from the Paris Olympics. You can also catch all the Olympics action live and on demand for free with MediaCorp on MeWatch. That's East Asia Tonight for this Friday. Don't forget headlines anytime at CNA.Asia and CNA 938 Radio. Plus, we're on Facebook, YouTube and X.